Hi, everybody. Well, this is a lecture on Venetian gondolas. I thought some of you may be interested in if the winged lion of St. Mark is the symbol of the Venetian state. For most other people, the symbol of Venice is the gondola, a very distinctive boat that served as the main form of transportation throughout the city for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I would say today that, well, in former times, like during the Renaissance, there were probably up to 10,000 people who were rowing these gondolas. Nowadays, there's about 400 people. Well, as I say, there aren't very many kinds of things that are more iconic to a city than the Venetian gondola. Here is a picture I took at the Bacino waterfront, where many of them are lined up they're used almost exclusively by tourists these days. It costs about 125 euro to go on a half-hour ride. So you might want to get as many people as you can. You can get, I think, a maximum of 6 people into a gondola. Now, I want to take you to a squero. A squero is a place where they make the gondolas, and there's only a couple of these left in Venice because only, as I say, 400 licenses are given each year, and there's not really a need for too many of these, but the two squeri that still survive are quite busy. And they look like any other workshop. There's all kinds of wood that's being cut up. There's all kinds of paints and glazes and solvents for the lacquer that is put on top of these things. So there's a lot of chemicals involved in this. And as I say, these gondolas are both repaired and made at the Squero. Well, this is a picture I took at one of the squari, which is you notice that a lot of gondoliers' hats, this is the typical gondolier's hat. The gondolier, of course, needs protection from the sun, so it's a wide-brimmed straw hat that's nice and light and breathes. And each gondolier will also have a kind of ribbon and decorate it in his own special way. Now, of course, these boats are made of wood. You would think perhaps that in modern days they would have fiberglass or aluminum hulls or something like that, but no, no, no. These boats are still made in the traditional way that they have been made for centuries and centuries. So it is a lost art. The probably less than 15 gondola makers are still around. But there are some young people, and they are learning how to do this craft, so it will not be totally lost. So at the Squero, you see a good portion of the Squero is with stacks of lumber that are drying out. There are many different types of wood, including elm and linden that are used, lime wood, various types of wood that has to be flexible, strong, and light. Well, here's a gondola sort of at the three-quarter stage of being constructed, and you can see all these. They try not to use any screws or nails because these screws or nails would just get pulled out anyway, or they would rust, or the salt water would affect them. So most of it is glues and just interlocking the pieces so they fit in perfectly. So you notice that the very back part and the very prow of the gondola is covered, and only the sort of low part in the middle, that's where people can be seated. Here's another view of some of the wooden pieces of the gondola being put together, as you might imagine, drill presses, all kinds of power tools that are used for, as in any kind of a wood shop, you've got those same kind. There's a grinder back there and looks like a bandsaw, things like that. Oh, here's a guy working on one of the gondolas, and then on the right-hand side you can see a gondola that is pretty much finished. The only thing that's missing is all the upholstery, which goes on the inside where the clients are going to be, and this is done somewhere else. The people who are working here, they don't do upholstery. The upholstery work is done by a specialist in another area. These guys here are just boat builders. I say guys, but there is one woman who is working as a gondola maker, and there are, well, up to last year there were two female gondoliers in Venice out of the 400. It was for many, many years, and still is today, a very much male-dominated job. Very often, let's say it's very typical that sons will get their father's licenses and inherit them through time. Anyway, I'm sure that this past year and a half has been very, very difficult for gondoliers because their income derives virtually entirely from tourist dollars. So since Venice has been closed because of the COVID-19 virus, I'm sure that they are not making very much money. In a good year, a good and popular gondolier can make up to $250,000 a year. But these boats are also quite expensive. They cost about $45,000 to make, and repairs have to be done pretty constantly, and the repairs are also expensive. Some of the boats that are in the Squero right now, when I was taking these pictures, were in for repair rather than just being totally rebuilt. Here's an example of one of the ones that was in for repair. And this particular part of the gondola is where the gondolier stands. So there's a lot of weight put on this little platform, and that's why it's a kind of a fragile part. So when the gondolier steps on this, you can see that it's supported on three sides, but then the other side is not supported. So that explains why this particular breaking may have happened. And I want to show you what that is. So for example, here's a picture of a gondolier, and do you see where he's standing? Well, if he stepped back one part, then he would be on that hollow section that is not very well supported. That's the part that broke in the previous slide. So notice that the gondolier stands. So the gondolier stands, and he stands on this little platform on the back of the gondola. If he's right-handed, he's basically on this side. If he's left-handed, he's on the other side. So the gondola maker has to know a few things about the gondolier themselves. They have to know their height, they have to know their weight, and they have to know whether they're left-handed or right-handed. Now the gondolier rows, but he rows with one oar, and usually carries two oars, one a kind of longer oar and one a kind of a shorter oar, depending on whether they're going through the deeper Grand Canal or whether they're going through the more shallow rios or rii, which are the smaller canals. And there is no rudder on a Venetian gondola. So the style of rowing, I'll show you, there is the oarlock or the forciola. And the fortula, you notice it has a kind of the oar just sort of rests in there, and the reason is because it has to be able to move in a lot of directions, because the stroke of the gondolier. Okay, he puts the paddle up front, and then he pushes the oar, but then he has to kind of twist it at the end because he has to also steer, because the oar is also the rudder. So it's a very complex movement in the rowing. I've given you some data here, some basic data on Venetian gondolas. They're about 11 meters long, okay, so pretty long, 33 feet long, more than 33 feet, almost 34 feet long. They weigh about 350 kilograms. Cost, I already mentioned, 45,000 euro. And they're made up of about 280 interlocking pieces of wood. Well, here are two finished gondolas, and you can see the gondolas are all black now, and they have been all black for about 500 years. But earlier, before the 15th century, there was a time when gondolas were many different colors. But then Venice passed a law. It was a kind of, well, it's a sort of a sumptuary law against display, and they said, well, no, we should have them a more dignified and somber color and just black. Well, of course, this was fine, but then all the other parts of the gondola started to become super, super fancy. So, so the idea of avoiding ostentatiousness was not really very successful. And I took these pictures because here you can see the seating area, right? And you can see how 6 people could basically fit in this area facing one another. It's always important to balance the boat. So if you have 2 people on one side, you should have 2 people on the other, because a balanced boat will help the gondolier move the gondola through the narrow canals of Venice. Now, you'll notice, take a look at the one on the right. Do you see how it looks like it's sort of twisted a bit off to the left? Well, that's because the gondolier will be standing. Do you see where the red cloth is? Now that red cloth is there. The red cloth is there so that that little platform there doesn't get damp. Because the gondolier doesn't want to slip on it. But when the gondolier goes up and stands on that little platform where the red piece of cloth is, then the gondola will be straight. It will straighten itself out, because that's why you need to know the weight of your gondolier, because that's how you know how to counterweight the weight of the gondolier. And part of the counterweighting is this prow here, which I will show you in a second. But I also showed you this because I want you to see how beautiful the interiors, the seating area of some of these gondolas are. And of course, if you have lots of money, you can pay extra and have the gondolier sing to you. If you want to have somebody who really is a good singer sing to you, then you actually have to pay for a singer, and that costs even more. If you want a bottle of champagne, then that costs more. So you can see how the bill for riding in a Venetian gondola can easily be inflated quite a bit. Here's some close-up of some of the, these are also pictures that I took in the Squero. So this is one. Now, you notice that there's a number here, 101. So each gondola will have a number, and this will basically be the license number of the gondolier and the gondola. Gondolas and gondoliers go together. Each gondolier owns their own gondola. It is not impossible that 2 gondoliers might share the cost of a gondola. It's not impossible. In former times, there used to be up to 4 owners of a gondola, but typically the situation today is that one gondolier owns his or her own gondola. And in this way, the gondola can also be constructed to suit the particular physical characteristics of that gondolier. In some cases, you see these beautiful decorations, sometimes with kind of gold leaf background. The beautiful black lacquer has as many, about 10 different layers of black lacquer, and then this has to be polished and finished to a very high sheen. Now, I mentioned the prow. Okay, so the metal prow of a gondola is called a faro di prora. And it has a very complex symbolism. Now, it's not just the prow, but if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you also notice that it goes down, right? And it goes down quite far underneath the boat, as you see on the top of the picture on the right. You see how that kind of comes down there? All right, so it's usually made of a heavy metal, iron that has been covered by zinc or some kind of chrome on the outside. And so it can weigh quite a bit. I mean, it can weigh 100 pounds or so. And the reason for this is it also helps keep the prow down a little bit and counterbalances, is part of the counterbalancing of the weight of the gondolier who is in the back. Well, there's a very complex symbolism about these prows. For example, you'll notice that there are 6 main teeth, and these 6 main teeth are the symbols of the different sestieri. Here's a little diagram: Marco Polo, San Paolo, Santa Croce, Castello, Dossoduro, and Cannaregio. And then there's another island that's an important island, but is not officially part of the sestieri of Venice, and that's the Giudecca. And so its tooth, its rebi, sticks out the back. The curve itself of the whole thing is supposed to symbolize the curve of the Grand Canal itself. And if you look on the left-hand side in the yellow oval, if you have to turn this upside down, right, because this is upside down, but that arc is supposed to represent the Rialto Bridge. So anyway, there's complex symbolism. Sometimes even people say that do you see in between, if you look at the rectangle on the upper left-hand side, there are these other designs. There's 3 designs, right, in between the Rebbe, right? And so some people say that they represent the 3 other main islands of the Venetian island chain. That is to say, Murano, which is famous for its glass making, Burano, and Torcello. Each gondola has a name, and here's the name, Ornella. It is usually prominently displayed on a metal piece there, right? And sometimes there's little sayings that are also added to it, little bits of Venetian wisdom. And this one, I took this picture. This is a fairly old one, Varata. That means launched. So it was launched in February 18th of 1989. So here we have a 32-year-old gondola that's in for some repairs. And as you can see, things look pretty weathered. So these boats have to be, every winter really, they have to be, you have to look them over, you have to repolish them, and so on and so forth. Remember that it is salty, brackish water in Venice, and so this salty water is very hard on the boats and their finishes. Well, thank you very much. That's just a little bit of information about the Venetian gondola, and I hope that one day you are able to ride in them. So we'll say goodbye as the gondola goes off into the sunset. Thanks very much, and see you next time.